You have no idea who you're dealing with, Mr. Carter. Her voice crackled over the phone, low and sharp, like the edge of broken glass. I didn't answer. In my world, silence is a weapon. Let them get nervous. Let them talk. We will bury you in legal fees, she said finally. You'll lose everything, and when it's over, you'll wish you had just taken our offer. I could see her in my mind, perfect posture, designer sunglasses, thinking she was the smartest person in the room. No, Linda, I said, slow enough to make every word land. When this is over, you'll be the one wishing. I hung up. And that's where my story begins. I might hold the world record for the most expensive act of revenge against a homeowners association. They took my land. I took their $12 million waterfront mansions. And I did it all without breaking a single law. My name's Daniel Carter. I'm a forensic accountant, which means I spend my days hunting down money trails, corporate fraud, shell companies, hidden accounts, the kind of stuff most folks would rather not think about. I'm good at it, very good. The kind of good that makes enemies nervous. But the fight that changed my life didn't start in a boardroom or a courtroom. It started here, on the rocky shoreline of Lake Westfield, the land my family had called home for over a century and a half. My property wasn't just dirt and water, it was history. My grandfather built the first wooden pier here in 1912. My father taught me how to fish off the East Dock when I was 5. There's an old boathouse near the cove that still smells of cedar and machine oil. Every inch of it carried the weight of memory. I wasn't naive. I knew what waterfront property meant to developers. I'd seen enough luxury projects swallow whole stretches of shoreline in my lifetime. But I believed the old boundaries still meant something. I believed wrong. The trouble started small, the kind of small that pretends to be harmless. One morning, I found the gate to my dock padlocked shut, with a bright orange sign from the county claiming, "Unsafe structure, access prohibited." Someone had filed a safety complaint. A week later, tire tracks appeared across the meadow near my western fence. They led straight from the private marina of Harbor Point Estates. My newest neighbors, a gated community of glass and stone mansions, lined up like trophies along the water. Harbor Point was the crown jewel of a developer called Mariner Developments, a name I would come to know far too well. It was run with military precision by its homeowners association. They had rules for everything: the height of hedges, the color of kayak racks, even how long you could keep a boat out of the water in winter. And at the center of it all was Linda Graves, HOA president, socialite, self-appointed guardian of Harbor Point's image. I met her for the first time when she showed up uninvited on my shoreline one crisp September morning. She stood there, arms folded, looking past me toward the trees. "These oaks," she said, pointing toward a line of giants that had stood since before my grandfather was born. "They block the lake view from several of our residences. You really should consider having them removed." I laughed, not kindly. "Lady, those trees have been here longer than your entire neighborhood." Her smile was tight, brittle. "Sometimes progress means letting go of the past, Mr. Carter." I didn't answer. She took my silence for weakness. A month later, the beige envelope showed up. It was taped to the door of my boathouse, flapping in the wind off the lake. Inside was the kind of legal language designed to make your head spin. A county notice declaring my property abandoned and transferring ownership to Harbor Point Estates. They had already sold it to Mariner Developments for their Phase 2 expansion, waterfront mansions, private marina extension, projected sales north of $200 million. And just like that, they thought they'd erased me. They had no idea the storm they'd just unleashed. Lake Westfield doesn't forgive the careless. The shoreline curves like an old scar, full of inlets and hidden shallows where you can run a prop clean off if you're not paying attention. I grew up learning every twist of it, the sound the water makes when the wind turns, the smell before a summer storm. Out here, you don't just own land. You belong to it. That's why, when I inherited the property after my parents passed, I didn't think of it in terms of acreage or dollar signs. It was my anchor, my quiet. My proof that not everything in the world had to be paved over or developed. The house I lived in wasn't much to look at compared to the glass palaces of Harbor Point. 2 stories, cedar siding, weathered silver by decades of sun and rain, a wraparound porch where I could drink my coffee and watch the mist crawl over the water in the morning. Some folks can't stand that kind of stillness. They need noise, traffic, neighbors, the constant hum of things happening. Me? I preferred the rhythm of the lake, the creak of dock lines in the wind, the splash of a bass breaking the surface. That rhythm started breaking the day Harbor Point Estates opened its gates. At first, I only heard about them through the papers. The premier lakeside community, all capital letters, all gloss. 100 acres of what used to be hardwood forest had been scraped clean for driveways and tennis courts. Private docks stretched out like fingers into the lake. I didn't like it, but I figured it wasn't my business. Then came the first letter. It arrived in a crisp white envelope with the HOA logo embossed on the flap. Inside was a neighborly reminder that my shoreline lacked proper erosion control and could pose a visual detraction from the lake's aesthetic. Visual detraction. That was a new one for me. I ignored it. That's when the little game started. Someone reported my boathouse to the county as structurally unsound. The inspector who showed up looked embarrassed to be there. The building passed with no issue, but a week later, a fresh unsafe structure notice was nailed to the dock gate. Then came the lawn service mix-up. A polite young crew showed up, sent by the HOA, to trim the shoreline vegetation. When I told them they were trespassing, they apologized, packed up, and drove off, straight toward the Harbor Point Gatehouse. Linda Graves herself started making appearances, always unannounced, always dressed like she'd just stepped out of a country club ad, pastel sweater draped over her shoulders, sunglasses big enough to hide half her face. Once I caught her standing on my dock, staring down the shoreline through a pair of binoculars. "You're on private property," I told her. She lowered the binoculars, smiled that brittle smile. "So are you, Mr. Carter." "This dock violates county setback ordinances. It's been here since 1912, I said. "Your ordinance wasn't even a thought back then." "That may be," she said, turning to leave, "but times change. You should consider keeping up." It wasn't what she said that stuck with me. It was the way she said it, like someone delivering a warning they were certain you wouldn't take seriously. By the time the beige envelope showed up, the one taped to my boathouse door, I'd learned enough about Harbor Point's ways to know it wasn't a mistake. The language was cold and clinical. Abandoned property, public nuisance, transfer of ownership to Harbor Point Estates, to be sold to Mariner Developments. Below that, in smaller print, was the projected use. Phase 2 waterfront expansion, private marina upgrade, new luxury villas with infinity pools. Starting at $12 million each. They weren't just after a slice of my land, they wanted it all. The shoreline, the coves, the history. I stood there on the dock, wind off the lake snapping at the paper in my hand, and felt something settle in my chest. Not rage, not panic. Something colder. Because if there's one thing I've learned from years of chasing down fraud and corporate theft, it's that the people who think they're untouchable are always wrong. And Harbor Point was about to find that out the hard way. You can tell a lot about a person by how they run a meeting. Linda Graves didn't run meetings. She staged performances. 2 weeks before that beige envelope showed up, I'd gotten wind that the Harbor Point HOA was holding their quarterly board session in the community hall. It was supposed to be open to residents and concerned parties, though I'm pretty sure I didn't fit the definition of either. Still, I walked in. The hall looked more like a boutique hotel lobby than anything else. Polished hardwood floors, panoramic windows looking out over the marina, rows of white folding chairs arranged with military precision. At the front was a long table draped in a navy cloth with the Harbor Point logo printed in gold. Linda sat in the center like a monarch presiding over her court. To her right was her husband, Mark, HOA treasurer, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. To her left, a row of board members in crisp polos, each with a name placard in front of them. She wore cream slacks, a silk blouse, and that same brittle smile she'd given me on the dock. Her hair was perfect, the kind of perfect that takes a small army and a lot of hairspray. The meeting started with what you'd expect. Landscaping budgets, security patrol reports, a long, tedious debate about whether paddleboards should be allowed to dry on docks overnight. Then she saw me. Her smile didn't falter. but her voice picked up a new edge. "We have an outside guest joining us this evening," she said, looking right at me. "Mr. Carter, would you like to explain your presence here?" "I'm here because your association seems awfully interested in my property," I said, my voice carried in the quiet room. "And I thought it might be polite to hear why, directly from you." A murmur ran through the crowd. Linda leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. "Your land, Mr. Carter, is an unfortunate eyesore on what is otherwise a pristine shoreline. Our community has certain standards to maintain property values. My property value's just fine without your help." A few people in the back snickered. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "It's also a safety concern. Overgrown vegetation, derelict structures." "You mean the 110-year-old boathouse? The one that's been inspected and cleared twice this year?" She didn't answer. Instead, she shifted gears. "Mr. Carter, no one here wishes to create conflict, but progress is inevitable. Sometimes we have to make room for what benefits the majority." "That's the thing about land," I said, keeping my tone calm. "It's not up for a popularity vote." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Linda finally smiled again, that same smile that says you'll regret this later, and tapped her gavel. "Let's move on." But I'd already seen what I needed to see. The rest of the meeting was a masterclass in control. Linda dictated the pace, shut down questions she didn't like, and made a point of rewarding her loyalists with approving nods. It wasn't governance, it was theater. And she was the star. When the session ended, I waited until the crowd thinned. She was gathering her papers when I stepped up to the table. "You enjoy this," I said quietly. Her eyes flicked up to mine. "Enjoy what?" "Power. Telling people what they can and can't do. Making the rules." She tilted her head, just slightly. "Power is just influence, Mr. Carter, and influence is only useful if you know how to keep it." I smiled. "Good. I'm glad you know how much you've got. Makes it all the more satisfying when it's gone." For the first time that night, her smile slipped, just for a heartbeat, before snapping back in place. As I walked out of that hall, I knew two things. One, Linda Graves wasn't just a busybody with a title. She was a calculated operator with a network, resources, and a willingness to play dirty. Two, I'd just told her, to her face, that I was coming for her. And from the look in her eyes, she'd taken the hint. It was a Thursday morning, the kind where the lake looks like glass, and even the gulls seemed to sleep in. I'd been out early, walking the property line with a mug of coffee, checking the fences before winter really set in. The air had that sharp, metallic bite that says snow isn't far off. That's when I saw it, a single beige envelope, taped dead center to the boathouse door. The wind coming off the lake made it flutter against the wood, a soft slap, slap, slap that somehow sounded louder than it should. No return address, no polite, "Please contact our office." Just my name, typed in block letters. I pulled it free, feeling the brittle crunch of cheap tape under my fingers, and slid out the contents. The letter inside was printed on county letterhead, but the phrasing, that was pure Harbor Point. This notice serves as official recognition that the property at Parcel 11B06, described as approximately 200 acres of waterfront and adjoining land, has been determined to be abandoned and in violation of county maintenance and safety ordinances. Effective immediately, ownership has been transferred to Harbor Point Estates for the purposes of Phase 2 development. All existing structures will be demolished. All personal effects will be removed or destroyed. I read it twice. The words didn't get any softer the second time. Abandoned, violation, transferred. It was legalese, sure, but I'd been in the game long enough to recognize when a document wasn't just written to inform you. It was written to end you. I walked down to the dock, envelope in hand, and stared across the water toward Harbor Point. From this angle, their waterfront looked like something out of a glossy magazine, massive glass panels catching the morning sun, white decks stacked with boats that cost more than most people's houses. But I knew the truth. Behind those walls was a group of people who thought my land was just a blank space on their expansion map. And at the top of that list, Linda Graves. I could see her in my mind's eye, probably sipping her imported coffee, telling the board how simple it had been. One county contact, One strategically placed complaint, one rubber stamp, and poof, my family's legacy was theirs to sell. The paper crumpled in my fist without me realizing it. I'd handled corporate fraud cases worth hundreds of millions. I'd chased dirty money across borders, cracked shell corporations wide open, and watched men in 5,000 suits leave court in handcuffs. But this was different. This wasn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. This was about home. My father's voice teaching me how to mend a fishing net. My mother planting wildflowers along the slope to the cove. Summers where the lake water was so warm, you could swim until midnight and still not want to leave. They thought they could erase all that with one envelope. I smoothed the paper out again, slid it back into its beige shroud, and tucked it inside my jacket. That's when the cold feeling hit me. Not fear, not shock, but that heavy, steady calm that comes when you stop reacting and start planning. Because the thing about people like Linda Graves is, they never imagine the other side might fight back. And they certainly don't imagine the other side might be better at their own game than they are. I turned back toward the house, the crunch of frost under my boots sounding almost like a countdown. This wasn't going to be a shouting match over property lines. This wasn't going to be a polite courtroom disagreement. No, this was going to be a war. And when it was over, the Harbor Point HOA wouldn't just lose. They'd lose in a way they'd never forget. War doesn't start with bullets. It starts with information. By the time I got back to the house, I already had the outline of a plan forming in my head. Step 1. Find out exactly how they pulled this stunt, and who helped them do it. I keep my office in what used to be my father's tackle room. The scent of cedar still lingers in the walls, mixed with the faint tang of machine oil. Against one wall sits my old workstation. 3 monitors, custom-built tower, hard drives stacked like bricks. Most folks who meet me think I'm just some quiet guy who likes fishing. They don't realize I've spent years in corporate investigations, and I never retired those skills. First stop, the county's online property records. Parcel 11B06, my land, had been transferred 3 days earlier. The authorizing signature, a county zoning clerk named Mitchell Ross. I didn't know him personally, but his name popped up in a few Harbor Point meeting minutes I'd pulled from their public site last year. That was interesting. The transfer cited chronic ordinance violations as justification, which meant there had to be a complaint file somewhere. I filed an official request with the county records office. No reason to hide my name yet. Paper trails cut both ways. While I waited, I started pulling on another thread. HOA budgets are public for tax purposes, and I knew exactly where to look. Within an hour, I had their last 3 years of financial statements on my desk. I brewed another pot of coffee and started reading line by line. It didn't take long before I saw it. Security consulting, $482,000, a massive jump from the previous year's $70,000. Even for a wealthy community, that was a glaring red flag. And right below that, community relations, $316,000. The kind of vague category that can hide just about anything. I leaned back in my chair, tapping a pen against my lip. The money was moving somewhere it shouldn't. I just needed to figure out where. The next day, I drove into town. Small towns have their own kind of network. People talk, but only if they trust you. My first stop was a diner on Main Street. The kind of place with cracked leather booths and coffee that could strip paint. That's where I ran into Jimmy, an old friend from high school who now worked as a part-time contractor for, you guessed it, Harbor Point Estates. After a bit of catching up, I steered the conversation toward the HOA. Jimmy rolled his eyes. You wouldn't believe the nonsense they pull. Linda's got that place wrapped around her little finger. They even had me redo landscaping on a lot they don't technically own yet. Said it was preparing for future development. What lot? I asked, keeping my voice casual. Down by the South Cove. Big chunk of land. Belongs to some stubborn guy who won't sell. You might know him. I smiled thinly. Yeah, I might. By the end of lunch, Jimmy had let slip that Linda met regularly with a consultant named Evan Kessler, a former real estate attorney who had been disbarred 5 years ago for shady transfers and forged easements. If he was involved, that explained a lot. That night, I pulled everything I could find on Kessler. Bankruptcy filings, disciplinary board reports, old cases where his name showed up in the footnotes, and, jackpot, a recent LLC filing listing Harbor Point Development Partners with both Kessler and Linda Graves as managing members. They weren't just playing HOA politics, they were running a full-scale land grab operation. By the time I closed my laptop, the wind had picked up outside, rattling the old windows. The lake was black under the moonlight, waves slapping against the dock. I knew then that this wasn't going to be some drawn-out civil dispute. This was organized theft, dressed up in official paperwork and polite language. And if they wanted to play this game, fine. I'd play it better. Information's a lot like fishing. You don't just cast once and hope. You set the bait, let it drift, and wait for the right bite. By now, I had enough dirt to make Linda Graves lose sleep. But a good fisherman knows, sometimes you don't set the hook right away. You let the fish run with it first. The morning after my deep dive into Harbor Point's finances, I took a slow drive past their waterfront strip. It wasn't reconnaissance so much as letting them see me. People like Linda can't stand not knowing what you're up to. She'd hear about it before lunch. My truck idling by her gates, my slow turn down their perfectly paved streets. Sure enough, by the time I got home, there was a message on my machine. "Mr. Carter, this is Linda Graves. I noticed you were in the neighborhood. If you have questions, perhaps you'd prefer a civilized conversation rather than whatever this is." I didn't call back. Instead, I made my first move, filing a lis pendens, a legal notice of pending litigation, on Parcel 11B06. It doesn't stop a sale outright, but it's like pouring glue into the gears. Anyone trying to buy that land would see my claim hanging over it like a thundercloud. The next step was quieter. I contacted an old colleague, Sarah McMillan, an investigative journalist who had made a career exposing shady development deals. She owed me a favor, and I cashed it in. Within 2 days, she was sniffing around Harbor Point under the guise of writing a luxury living feature. Meanwhile, I started my own pressure campaign. It began small, anonymous tips to the county inspector's office about potential code violations in Harbor Point's newest phase, the kind of complaints that trigger surprise visits and red-tagged projects. Then came calls to the IRS whistleblower hotline about irregularities in their nonprofit filings. All legitimate leads, all drawn from the documents I'd already pulled. I knew this would spook them, but the goal wasn't panic. It was to make them overreact. The break came faster than I expected. 3 days later, I was at the hardware store picking up winterizing supplies when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "You're going to want to see this. Coffee at Miller's in 30. When I got there, she slid a small recorder across the table. "Got this yesterday," she said. "One of their board members likes to talk after 2 glasses of Merlot." I pressed play. It was Mark Graves, Linda's husband, his voice low but clear. I told her this Kessler thing was going to blow back on us. "He's already been investigated twice. If the county digs too deep, they'll find everything. The shell companies, the pre-purchase landscaping deals, even the payouts. I leaned back, smiling. "You realize this is gold," Sarah nodded. "Gold that's going to need more polishing. But yes, it's a start." That night, I wrote a list. Not of evidence. I had plenty of that. But of pressure points. The county zoning board's next public hearing. Local TV reporters always hungry for a scandal. Real estate blogs that feed on stories of corruption. And every homeowner in Harbor Point who didn't realize their HOA dues were funding Linda's private empire. I wasn't just going to defend my land anymore. I was going to make it so toxic for them to keep pushing that they'd wish they'd never heard my name. The lake was quiet as I stood on the porch, the cold air biting at my face. Somewhere across the water, Harbor Point's perfect little world was about to start cracking. And the best part? They'd never see the hammer coming until it hit. When you push the right pressure points, you don't have to kick the door in. It starts to open on its own. Within a week of filing the lis pendens, little hairline fractures began to show in Harbor Point's perfect facade. The first crack came from the county inspector's office. One frosty Tuesday morning, a white utility van pulled up to their new development phase. I happened to be sitting in my truck across the cove, sipping coffee, watching through binoculars as 2 inspectors in bright orange vests started taping red "Stop Work" notices to half-finished retaining walls. Turns out, when you build too close to a wetland buffer without the right permits, the fines get real steep, real fast. The second crack came from Sarah's side. She'd fed just enough of her luxury living research to a local TV reporter to spark curiosity. By Thursday night, Channel 9 was running a 2-minute segment about questions surrounding Harbor Point's rapid expansion, complete with slow pans over the empty lots they claimed were already sold. Linda didn't like that one bit. I know, because the following afternoon, I got a call from someone I'd never met, a man named David Walsh, one of Harbor Point's board members. His voice was tight, like a guy who had been carrying someone else's water for too long. "Look," he said, "I can't talk long, but not everyone on this board is happy with how Linda runs things. If you've got something real, something that proves she's crossing the line, you might find a few of us willing to help." Bingo. That weekend, I kept my distance physically, but I let the information do the walking. Anonymous packets, containing excerpts from the HOA's inflated budgets and Mark Graves's recorded slip about payouts, found their way into the mailboxes of select Harbor Point residents. I didn't need to send it to everyone, just enough people to start a whisper chain. By Monday morning, the whispers had turned into quiet conversations at the yacht club bar, on the pickleball courts, in the aisles of the overpriced organic market they all loved. People were asking questions, and Linda wasn't used to questions. Then came the third crack, a public one. I was at the hardware store again when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Channel 9 follow-up tonight, not just zoning violations. They're hinting at financial improprieties. When I tuned in, there she was, Linda Graves, standing in front of the Harbor Point clubhouse, fielding questions with that frozen smile. She kept repeating the same lines about misunderstandings and fully cooperating with all inquiries, but you could see the strain in her eyes. And behind her, 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. One of them, Walsh, didn't even bother to hide the way he avoided her gaze. That's when I knew. The fortress wasn't just cracking. Pieces were starting to fall off, but I didn't kid myself. People like Linda don't fold easy. They double down. And sure enough, the next morning a certified letter arrived at my door, this time from their attorney, full of threats about defamation, tortious interference, and a promise to pursue all legal remedies. I read it once, smiled, and tucked it into a drawer, because here's the thing. They were reacting. And when your opponent starts reacting instead of controlling the game, you've already got the upper hand. The lake was choppy that night, wind-driven waves slapping against the dock. I stood out there for a while, looking across the dark water toward those gleaming mansions. Somewhere in there, Linda Graves was realizing she couldn't keep the lid on much longer, and I was just getting started. The thing about traps, you don't spring them too soon. You let the prey get comfortable inside, thinking they still have a way out. After that certified letter from Harbor Point's lawyer, I knew Linda was going to tighten her grip. The trick was to make her think she was still in control, right up until she wasn't. Step 1, feed the fire. I sent Sarah a packet of documents I'd been holding back, a paper trail showing how Harbor Point's security consulting firm was actually a shell company registered to Kessler's nephew. Every invoice was padded, every payment laundered through 2 different LLCs before landing in an offshore account. Sarah didn't publish it, not yet. She dangled it. Dropped hints in conversations with 2 other reporters she knew would circle Linda like sharks smelling blood. And just like that, the press attention doubled. Step 2, pressure from inside. David Walsh called again, this time with urgency in his voice. "The board's splitting," he said. "2 of us are ready to vote no confidence, but Linda's rallying her loyalists. If something big hits, something we can't ignore, she's finished." I didn't give him the something big yet. Instead, I gave him enough to stir the pot, copies of internal memos between Linda and Kessler discussing fast-tracking certain land transfers before any state review. Walsh leaked them to the rest of the board. I knew because, by the next HOA meeting, half the members were openly questioning her in front of residents. That had never happened before. Step 3, bring in the law. I forwarded select financial documents, not all of them, just enough, to a contact at the state attorney's office. No accusations, no speeches, just, "You might find these transactions worth a look." By the end of the week, a quiet preliminary inquiry had begun. Harbor Point didn't know it yet, but a subpoena was coming. That's when Linda made her mistake. On Friday night, Sarah called. "You're not going to believe this. I just got an email, not meant for me, from one of Linda's assistants. It's a memo to the county clerk asking for backdated approvals on the South Cove landscaping. She copied Kessler on it. That memo was the missing piece. Backdating approvals isn't just shady, it's illegal. And now we had it in writing. I didn't send it to the press right away, I sent it to Walsh." "Time to end this," I told him. The following Monday, at a closed-door HOA meeting, Walsh dropped the memo on the table. Sarah had a source in the room, and later she told me the scene was beautiful. Linda trying to brush it off, other board members reading it with widening eyes, one of them actually standing up and walking out. The vote didn't happen that night, but the damage was done. The whispers had turned to open mutiny. That same evening, Sarah finally pulled the trigger. Channel 9 ran an exclusive exposé, luxury development under fire, financial misconduct, allegations at Harbor Point Estates. They didn't name me. They didn't have to. I watched the broadcast from my living room, the lake wind rattling the windows. There was Linda, flanked by her attorney, both of them refusing to answer questions. Behind them, Kessler kept glancing around like a man who'd just realized the walls were closing in. And they were. Because the trap wasn't just about exposing them. It was about making sure every possible exit was locked. County, state, press, their own board, even their residents. By the time they realized it, they weren't fighting me anymore. They were fighting everyone. Some storms you can see coming from miles away. Others break over your head before you hear the first crack of thunder. For Linda Graves, it was both. The morning started quiet enough. The lake was glassy, the air crisp, the kind of day Harbor Point likes to put in their brochures. I was drinking coffee on the porch when I saw the first set of unmarked SUVs roll past my driveway. Then another, and another. They weren't here for me. Half an hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Search warrants. County sheriff and state investigators. It's happening." I took a slow drive toward Harbor Point. You couldn't get close. The main gates were blocked. Deputies and windbreakers posted at every turn. But from the hill above the South Cove, I had the perfect vantage point. Inside, chaos. Investigators hauling boxes out of the HOA office. Deputies standing guard at the clubhouse entrance. Even from a distance, I could see residents gathering in little knots, whispering, pointing. Their perfect morning walk interrupted by the sight of Linda's empire cracking apart. Around 10 o'clock, the local TV crews arrived. Sarah was there too, microphone in hand, hair whipping in the wind as she narrated live. Sources tell us the warrants are related to alleged financial misconduct, fraudulent land transfers, and zoning violations involving the Harbor Point Estates Homeowners Association. Right on cue, the clubhouse doors swung open. Out stepped Linda Graves, pale but still trying to hold that brittle smile. Beside her, Kessler looked like he hadn't slept in days. Behind them, 2 uniformed deputies, not touching them, not yet, but close enough to remind everyone how this story was heading. One reporter shouted, "Mrs. Graves, is it true HOA funds were funneled through shell companies?" She didn't answer. Another yelled, "Did you personally authorize backdated approvals for land development?" That one hit. Her jaw tightened, eyes flicking toward Kessler, and then Walsh appeared, not with her, but standing off to the side with 2 other board members. He didn't say a word, just folded his arms and watched. The message was clear. She was on her own. By noon, news helicopters were circling overhead. The footage would run all day. Linda's tense face, the boxes of seized documents. Residents muttering about never knowing and wondering where the money went. I stayed until the first black sedan from the state attorney's office rolled in. That was the last piece, the real hammer. By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. HOA president under investigation for $12 million fraud. Waterfront community rocked by corruption probe. State freezes assets of Harbor Point leadership. And just like that, the fortress was gone. Her bank accounts, frozen, her allies, scattered. Her reputation, reduced to a punchline in the coffee shop. I didn't celebrate, not yet. There was still the matter of my land, and the legal tangle that would take months to unwind. But as I stood on my porch that night, the cold air sharp in my lungs. I could see the glow from Harbor Point across the lake. It didn't look so untouchable anymore. Somewhere in that gleaming mess of mansions, Linda Graves was packing for a future she couldn't control. And for the first time since they'd tried to take everything from me, I knew I'd already won. Winning in public is one thing. Winning on paper, that's where it counts. The morning after the Harbor Point raid, my attorney, Tom Landry, sat across from me at the kitchen table. The man had been fighting land disputes for 30 years and looked like he'd seen every trick in the book. But even he cracked a grin when he dropped the file in front of me. "They folded," he said. "States freezing their assets, and without liquid cash, they can't keep fighting the lease pendants on your property. You're getting the land back." I picked up the papers. The legal reversal of the sale, signed and filed, 2,200 acres restored to my name. It should have felt like closure, but it didn't, because Linda and her crew had tried to bury me, tried to bleed me dry while lining their pockets. Just getting my land back wasn't enough. Tom must have read my face. "You're still thinking about the mansions, aren't you?" I was. Harbor Point's common properties, including 3 prime waterfront estates worth a combined $12 million, were technically HOA-owned assets. And here's the beautiful part. When the state froze their accounts and the board fractured, the HOA fell out of compliance with its own bylaws. That triggered a provision in county code, one I had had bookmarked for months, that allowed lien holders to force a sale of HOA assets to satisfy outstanding judgments. Guess who was now the largest lien holder? That afternoon, Tom filed the paperwork. No theatrics, no press conference, just a clean, legal move that put me in position to control the auction of Harbor Point's crown jewels. Word got out fast. Residents panicked. The thought of their beloved clubhouse properties being sold to outsiders was unthinkable. Some tried to organize a buyback fund, but with their HOA accounts frozen and their board in shambles, they couldn't move fast enough. Auction day was a sight. Dozens of curious onlookers crowded the county courthouse steps. Linda wasn't there. By then, she was lawyering up for what would likely be criminal charges. Kessler had vanished altogether. But a handful of Harbor Point's wealthiest residents showed, hoping to swoop in and keep the estates in the community. Too bad for them. I'd done my homework. I'd lined up a buyer, a developer I trusted, with cash in hand. He wasn't interested in flipping them into condos. He wanted to turn them into high-end vacation rentals, open to the public. When the gavel came down, those $12 million worth of waterfront mansions were sold, fair, legal, and irrevocable. And every penny went to satisfying the judgments I'd secured against the HOA, judgments they'd earned the hard way. By the time the dust settled, I not only had my land back, I'd turned their pride and joy into something they could never fence off again. That night, I stood on the porch with a glass of bourbon, watching the lights across the lake. For years, those mansions had been symbols of exclusion, arrogance, and greed. Now, they were booked solid for the summer, by fishermen, families, and anyone else who could pay the rental fee. Harbor Point would never be the same, and neither would I. When the fight's over, the noise fades fast, but the echoes, those linger. Within a month of the auction, Harbor Point was a different place. The manicured calm was still there, the lake, the neat lawns, the yachts bobbing at their slips, but the people walked differently. No more tight smiles and quick glances away. Now they looked each other in the eye, sometimes with relief, sometimes with resentment. Word spread fast that the waterfront mansions were now public rentals, fishermen hauling coolers down the docks, kids cannonballing off private piers, the kind of scenes Harbor Point's exclusive residents had fought to keep out, became part of daily life. Some hated it. Some pretended not to care, but everyone knew it happened because their leaders had overreached, and because someone pushed back harder. As for Linda Graves, the day the indictments came down, I was stacking firewood when my phone buzzed with Sarah's text. 2 counts fraud, 1 count conspiracy, 1 count falsifying public records. Kessler got hit too. Turns out the state's investigation had gone deeper than even I expected. Offshore accounts, kickbacks from contractors, falsified zoning approvals, the whole scheme laid bare. The trial would be months away, but with bail set high and their passports surrendered, neither Linda nor Kessler was going anywhere. Walsh reached out once more, this time in person. We met at a small diner off the highway, far from the lake. He looked 10 years older, but lighter. "You got your land back," he said. "And you burned the rot out of the place." I didn't think it was possible. I told him I hadn't done it alone. People like him, Sarah, even the quiet residents who started asking questions, they'd all played a part. But Walsh just shook his head. "Most of us talk about doing something," he said. "You actually did it." I didn't know what to say to that. The legal side wasn't over. My lawyers were still unwinding the mess of liens, false filings, and county records Linda's team had tangled up. But for the first time in years, I could walk my land, all 2,200 acres, without feeling like someone else's shadow was on it. One evening, I took the old trail down to the South Ridge, the place where you could see the whole lake stretch out like glass. The sun was sinking low, throwing long gold light over Harbor Point. From up there, it looked peaceful, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's knowing you can handle it when it comes knocking. It's funny how the land remembers. You walk it after a storm, and it still holds the weight of every raindrop. You walk it after a fight, and somehow it feels lighter. 6 months had passed since the auction. The seasons had turned. The cottonwoods along the ridge bursting green again. My days had shifted back to the simple things: fixing fences, tending the dock, early mornings with coffee and the lake mist curling off the water. The lawsuits were winding down. Most of the liens had been cleared, my title was clean, and Harbor Point was still under state oversight. The waterfront rentals stayed booked, bringing in a different crowd every week. You could hear laughter across the water now, not just the quiet hum of yacht engines. One Saturday morning, Sarah came by. She stood on the porch, looking out over the lake. "You ever think about selling it all?" she asked. I shook my head. "This place isn't just dirt and trees. It's where my father taught me to fish, where my mother planted wildflowers by the dock. Selling it would be like selling part of myself." She smiled, the kind of smile that knows the weight of what you're saying. "Then I guess you got exactly what you came for." Maybe I did, but somewhere deep down, I knew it was more than that. This wasn't just about reclaiming land. It was about proving that some lines can't be crossed without consequence, that no matter how big, rich, or untouchable someone thinks they are, the truth still counts for something. A week later, I walked the property line at sunset. The lake was glowing amber, and in the distance the lights of Harbor Point twinkled like they always had. But to me, they looked different now, not like a fortress, but like part of the same horizon. The fight had taken years, cost more than I'd ever imagined. But standing there, with my boots on my land and the wind off the water in my face, I knew I'd do it all again. Some folks think revenge is about evening the score. They're wrong. It's about making sure the game's never played the same way again. And in my corner of the world, it never will be.